So those are the ballers of the week for week 9. Now we are going to go and let John take the wheel for the week 10 waiver wire pickup targets.
All right. So this week for waivers, it's a little weird. Not a whole lot of great streaming options. It's just unfortunate week when it comes to bye weeks and matchups and all that kind of stuff for typical streaming options. But there is a lot of depth at the skill positions, wide receiver and running back, that you can pick up this week that can be very useful. Anyway, starting at cornerback, we're going to go with Taysom Hill. He was on here last week. He didn't end up starting at QB, but I think it's only a matter of time when he does. And I'd rather be picking him up early than, be someone who tries to get him late and miss. Because when Taysom Hill does start at QB, he's just a monster because of the rushing ability that he does have. In most fantasy league scoring, rushing is going to be worth more than passing. And so having a dual threat quarterback is so, important in fantasy because of the added points that they can get easily for the same amount of yards, just through rushing instead of passing. So Taysom Hill, absolutely would try to pick him up. Worst case, he doesn't ever win the job over the next few weeks. But I think with, half the season remaining, there's going to be a point at which he does, because Trevor Simeon's good, but I don't expect him to be the full option. I think that Taysom is still just recovering from the concussion, and eventually he'll take over the QB spot. Next, as a streaming option at quarterback, Trevor Lawrence from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Not having an amazing year, not really a fantasy relevant quarterback, but they do play the Colts, and the Colts are just struggling with injuries on the back end. They just lost Julian Blackman for the year. Xavier Rhodes has not been playing. Just a lot of injuries in that secondary, and so although they have a solid front seven, that bodes obviously more well for the quarterback, because that means they're probably going to stuff a lot of stuff at the run, and that means you're probably going to have to pass the ball more. Plus Carson Wentz, Jonathan Taylor in that offense, they're scoring a lot, and so I expect the Jags to be playing from behind. And so Trevor Lawrence could be a solid streaming option. I don't think he's going to blow anybody out of the water, but could have a solid performance if your QB's on bye or you're dealing with injuries, whatever. Trevor Lawrence, solid option for this week. Moving on to running backs, Devonta Freeman from the Baltimore Ravens. I wouldn't really trust the Ravens because they use too many running backs, but ultimately one of them is going to be good for a touchdown probably every week, and Devonta Freeman seems like the favorite as of right now. Latavius Murray has been dealing with injuries, and so he's just not reliable. Wouldn't pick him. Le'Veon Bell has been involved, but not a whole lot. So Freeman seems like the go-to guy as of right now, getting a majority of the workload, and he's involved in both the running and the receiving game. So pick up Devonta Freeman if you're in need of a running back. And the next running back, the last one of this week, Jordan Howard from the Philadelphia Eagles. It's funny because the last 3 weeks we've had all 3 Eagles running backs on here, and that's because we just don't know who the guy is going to be in the absence of Miles Sanders. I can feel pretty confident that after 2 weeks, Jordan Howard's probably the one you want to go for. Boston Scott is still valuable because he does get involved, I would say about equally as Jordan Howard, but Howard has been the most consistent one when it comes to getting a touchdown, getting goal line carries, as well as, getting a lot of the running work. And so I would rely on Jordan Howard out of all the Eagles running backs to be the one that you go for, because he's probably good for about 10 or more touches. And some of those are going to be goal line things where he can get a touchdown. That being said, who knows what his value or any of those guys' value is going to turn into with Miles Sanders coming back potentially next week. Moving on to wide receiver, we have 4 options this week. The first is Desean Jackson from the Las Vegas Raiders. Got cut by the Rams, was having an all right year, got picked up by the Raiders in the midst of the Henry Ruggs stuff. And I think that he could have an expanded role here with the Raiders. I don't expect him to be, what he used to be, back in his prime, but he is a deep threat. And so any play that he is in, any target that's going to him, it's more than likely going to be, a monster, play. And that bodes well for fantasy because he might not have, Cooper Kupp level targets, but he can get 5 targets, convert that into, 80 yards. That's what you want. So the fact that he could have an expanded role here in the Raiders offense, who is the most reliant offense on plays of 15 yards or more, Desean Jackson could be a big time option here, especially with last week. Bryan Edwards didn't get involved really at all. I don't expect that to be continued moving forward, but you'd expect him to step up in the absence of Henry Ruggs. Didn't happen. Next at wide receiver, Brandon Aiyuk. This is the pickup of the week. If you can get him, it looks like Brandon Aiyuk is back. I hope that you picked him up last week when we had him on here. Have him again just in case you didn't, because the last 2 weeks he has actually run more routes than Deebo Samuel has. And he's had, I think, over 6 targets both weeks. This week he got a touchdown as well. If this is any indicator of what he's going to be doing moving forward, we could see the Brandon Aiyuk of last year back in the swing of things, which could mean that he could be back in your fantasy starting lineups as soon as even this week, honestly. The next wide receiver, a rookie, my guy, Elijah Moore, came out, had 2 touchdowns in this previous game. I think that he's getting more involved in this offense. If Josh Jackson is going to if Josh Johnson is the starting quarterback this next week, he was a big fan of Elijah Moore. He threw a lot of passes his way, and so absolutely would want Elijah Moore in your lineups this week. But even with Mike White or Zach Wilson, I think they want to get their rookie Elijah Moore more involved. I know that Corey Davis has been missing time, but honestly, would not expect him to really be a threat to Elijah Moore. I think he's more likely to steal work away from Keelan Cole, Jamison Crowder, some of these other guys, because when you have a second-round pick wide receiver, you want to get him involved, and we're starting to see Elijah Moore is getting that work, and he's doing well with it. Another wide receiver, I do put on all these posts available in 50% of leagues. I'm not actually sure if he is in this one, but if he is available in your league, absolutely pick him up. And that's Michael Gallup from the Dallas Cowboys. Plain and simple, he's a playmaker. He's one of those guys who can make plays deep downfield, doesn't need a lot of targets to get a lot of fantasy points. And then last year we saw in the final 4 weeks of the year in our fantasy playoffs, those were his 4 best weeks of the season. This year as well, the Dallas Cowboys have similar schedule when it comes to opposing defenses, with Washington multiple times, the Giants in there, teams that can be exposed at their number 2 cornerback spots. Michael Gallup is typically that guy who can, expose those those corners. I know that CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper are still there, but Michael Gallup has had them, last year and still was able to perform. And just ultimately, when it's an offense of this level, you want to be invested at some piece of them. I mean, look at the Rams. People have Van Jefferson in their leagues. Sonny Michel is still on rosters. When it's a high-scoring offense, you want as many pieces of it as you can potentially on your team, because there's a lot of opportunity for fantasy points. So Michael Gallup, make sure that he is not available on the waivers this week. If he is, pick him up. At tight end, Pat Friarmuth, he was on here last week. He had a 20-point game this week. He's just getting more and more involved in the Steelers offense. And I think that he is the stereotypical Steelers tight end that Big Ben is used to playing with over his entire career. He's getting involved a lot in the red zone, and I think that's big because they're missing Juju. Deontay Johnson, he's not a massive red zone threat. So it's kind of Chase Claypool, Najee Harris, and now Pat Friarmuth. Those are their guys in the red zone. Friarmuth has become reliable. And with the tight end position being as thin as it is, he's a guy that could be a tight end 1 for the remainder of the year. Pick him up if you need a tight end. And the final tight end, a guy that could be returning from IR this week, that is Logan Thomas from the Washington football team. Simply put, he's just really involved when he's healthy. So I think he's like Michael Gallup, might not actually be available in 50% of leagues or more, but he is available in plenty of leagues. And so if he is there, go get him, because he gets involved. He gets at least 5 to 6 targets a game, and he's very involved in the red zone, because they just don't really have a lot of red zone threats. Terry McLaurin's an amazing wide receiver, not necessarily a massive red zone threat. Same with Curtis Samuel, Antonio Gibson, J.D. McKissick. They're just guys that aren't, going to be primary red zone targets like Logan Thomas is. So if he's available in your league and you need a tight end, go get him, because he's always good for potentially a touchdown. And if he's anything like we saw last year, he could have some monster performances ahead for him. So those are the Week 10 waivers. Pick up these guys if you need anybody in your positions. Like we've mentioned every week for the last few weeks, we're hitting on some of these players to where they become pretty viable options moving forward. Brandon Aiyuk and Pat Friarmuth were both on here last week, and they both boomed this week. So, look at some of these guys. They could be very reliable in your leagues.
Yeah, or don't, and pay the consequences later. So,
yep.
Anyways, so that is that. That's the waiver wires, and that is this episode. So yeah, as per usual, give us a like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening / watching. whether it be podcast or YouTube, wherever you get your podcast streaming services like Apple TV or not Apple TV, but Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Also, like I've mentioned before, but we'll mention again because he's been killing it, is the Instagram at Shut Up and Ball Pod, where majority of our posts are, majority of our interaction is. We still also have a TikTok at Shut Up and Ball and Twitter. It's the same handle for both. And then a Facebook page, Shut Up and Ball. Other than that, we will see you all later in the week. I was about to say Thursday. We'll make our picks Thursday for week 10. Let me pull up that game real quick. Sorry.
Who even plays this Thursday?
I forgot. It's not a great game if I remember correctly.
Ravens,
Dolphins. Yeah, Ravens favored by 7.5. Dolphins are at home.
I'm gonna go with the Ravens here.
Yeah.
I don't really trust Jacoby Brissett. I think he's probably gonna be the one playing, even if he's not Tua. I don't really trust either of them to deal with the blitz heavy attack that the Ravens have. And I think Lamar, he's just doing Lamar things.
Tempted to pick Miami, but I'm going to pick Baltimore. I can't trust Miami. So, yeah, I'm going Baltimore as well. So, there's our Thursday night picks. But we'll be back, like I mentioned, later in the week to make the rest of our picks for week 10. And, yeah, everyone, enjoy your week, and we will see you then.